The desert wind carried dust across the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Iron Den, a dive bar on the outskirts of Barstow, California. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and deep purple. The air smelled of motor oil, leather, and gasoline, a scent that clung to everything in this part of town. Outside, a row of gleaming Harley-Davidsons stood like sentinels, their chrome reflecting the dying light. Each bike bore the unmistakable insignia, a winged skull, the mark of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. This wasn't just any bar. This was their territory. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with smoke and tension. The jukebox in the corner played an old rock song, AC/DC's Highway to Hell, while about 30 bikers occupied the space. Some sat at the bar nursing beers, others played pool in the back, and a few huddled around tables covered in empty bottles and half-eaten baskets of fries. The walls were decorated with motorcycle parts, vintage beer signs, and photographs, faded images of rides, rallies, and brothers who'd ridden their last mile. Behind the bar stood Marcus Axe Thompson, the club's vice president, a mountain of a man with a salt and pepper beard, arms covered in tattoos, and eyes that had seen too much. He was wiping down a glass when the front door creaked open. The music didn't stop immediately, but conversations did. A young man stepped inside. He was in his late 20s, maybe 30, average build, wearing jeans, work boots, and a plain grey jacket. Nothing that marked him as a biker, no leather vest. No patches, no cuts displaying club affiliation. His dark hair was slightly messy from the wind, and his eyes, hazel, intense, scanned the room with a mixture of nervousness and determination. He was a ghost in a room full of warriors. One by one, heads turned. The pool game stopped mid-shot. The conversations died. Someone finally reached over and turned down the jukebox. Silence. 30 pairs of eyes locked onto the stranger. Axe set down his glass slowly. "Bar's private tonight, friend," he said, his voice gravelly but not hostile yet. "You lost." The stranger took a breath. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. "No," he said quietly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." A ripple of tension moved through the room. A few bikers shifted in their seats. One man, a younger member with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, cracked his knuckles. But the stranger didn't flinch. He walked forward, each step deliberate until he reached the bar. The floorboards creaked under his weight. The smell of leather and whiskey surrounded him. "I'd like a drink," he said, meeting Axe's gaze without backing down. Axe studied him for a long moment. Then, almost amused, he nodded. "What'll it be?" "Whiskey." "Neat." Axe poured a double shot of Jack Daniels and slid it across the bar. The stranger picked up the glass, his fingers wrapping around it firmly. Then he did something no one expected. He turned toward the wall behind the bar, where a single photograph hung in a weathered wooden frame. It was an old picture, faded with time, showing a man in his 40s with a wide grin, wearing a Hells Angels cut. His arm was draped over a bike and his eyes sparkled with life. The name below the photo read, "James Reaper Calloway, 1965-2015. Ride free, brother." The stranger raised his glass toward the photo. "To Reaper," he said, his voice steady but loaded with emotion. "The best man I never got to know." The room went deathly silent. Every biker in that bar knew who Reaper was. He'd been a legend in the club. A road captain, a brother, a man who'd bled for the patch on his back. He'd died 9 years ago in a crash on Route 66, riding solo in the rain. The club had mourned him like family, but this stranger, this nobody, was toasting him like he had the right. From the back corner of the bar, a chair scraped against the floor. A man stood up. Thomas Hammer Calloway, president of the Barstow chapter. 6'3", built like a freight train, with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail and a beard braided at the ends. His cut was covered in patches, decades of loyalty stitched into leather. His eyes were cold, calculating, and locked onto the stranger. Hammer walked forward slowly, his boots heavy on the floor. The other bikers parted like water, creating a path. The tension was unbearable. He stopped 3 feet from the stranger. "You got a lot of nerve," Hammer said, his voice low and dangerous. "Walking in here, toasting a brother you never met." The stranger didn't break eye contact. "You're right," he said. "I never met him, but he was my father." The words hung in the air like thunder. Hammer's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or disbelief. Your father, Hammer repeated slowly. James Calloway. Reaper. The stranger's voice cracked just slightly. He left my mother before I was born. I didn't even know he existed until 6 months ago, when she died. Found his name in a box of old letters. Took me this long to track down where he'd been. Hammer stared at him, processing. The room was frozen. Then Hammer did something unexpected. He stepped closer, close enough that the stranger could smell the leather and smoke on him. Hammer's eyes searched the young man's face, line by line, feature by feature. You got his eyes, Hammer said quietly. Same stubborn look. The stranger's breath hitched. Hammer turned to the room. This is Ethan Calloway, he announced, his voice carrying authority. Reaper's son. Slowly, the tension began to dissolve. Murmurs spread through the bar. Some bikers nodded. Others looked skeptical but stayed quiet. Hammer placed a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. Reaper was my best friend for 20 years. If you're his blood, then you're welcome here. Ethan's eyes glistened, but he held it together. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hammer raised his own glass. To Reaper, the entire bar echoed. Ethan downed his whiskey, the burn grounding him in the moment. He'd walked into this bar a stranger, but he wouldn't leave as one. The night deepened over Barstow, and the desert cold began to creep through the cracks in the bar's walls. But inside the iron den, warmth radiated, not from the old space heater in the corner, but from the stories being shared around Ethan Calloway. Hammer had pulled up a stool beside him, and what had started as cautious conversation had evolved into something deeper. Other members of the club gathered around, some standing, others pulling up chairs. The jukebox now played low, classic rock humming in the background like a heartbeat. Your old man, Hammer began, his voice taking on a softer tone, was the craziest son of a bitch I ever rode with. He shook his head, a smile tugging at his weathered face. Smart, though, real smart. Could fix any bike with duct tape and a prayer. Ethan leaned forward, hanging on every word. His whole life, his father had been a phantom, a name without a face, a question without an answer. Now for the first time, James Reaper Calloway was becoming real. Axe, the vice president, chimed in from behind the bar. Reaper once rode 300 miles on a busted clutch just to make it to a brother's funeral. Bike was smoking like a chimney, but he refused to stop. He poured himself a shot. That's the kind of man he was, loyal to the bone. A woman emerged from the back hallway. Rita Blaze Navarro, the club's treasurer and one of the few women who wore the patch. She was in her 50s, with long grey-streaked hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that could cut through steel. She'd been a part of the club for 30 years. I remember when Reaper joined, she said, sitting down across from Ethan. 1987. He was younger than you are now. Came in on a beat-up shovelhead. No money, no family. Just determination. She studied Ethan carefully. You look like him. Talk like him too. Quiet until it matters. Ethan swallowed hard. What happened to him? I mean, I know he died in a crash, but was he... He struggled for the words. Was he happy? The question landed heavy. Hammer exhaled slowly, looking down at his glass. Reaper loved the road more than anything. And yeah, he was happy, but he carried regrets. He met Ethan's eyes. He told me once, years before he died, that he'd left someone behind. A woman in Arizona. Said he was too young, too stupid, too scared to be a father. Thought she was better off without him. Ethan's throat tightened. My mum, Sarah Calloway. He never forgot her. Hammer said quietly. Used to talk about her sometimes, late at night after too many drinks. Wondered if he'd made the right choice. Ethan's hands clenched into fists on the bar. He didn't, he said, his voice strained. She raised me alone. Worked 2 jobs. Never remarried. And she never stopped loving him, even though he abandoned us. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't tension. It was respect for the pain being shared. Blaze reached across the table and placed her hand over Ethan's. Your mom sounds like she was strong as hell. She was, Ethan whispered. Breast cancer took her 6 months ago. I found his letters in a shoebox under her bed after the funeral. That's how I learned about him. About this. He gestured around the bar. Hammer stood up and walked to the wall behind the bar. He took down the framed photo of Reaper and brought it over, setting it gently on the bar in front of Ethan. He was a good man who made a bad choice, Hammer said, but he earned his place here. And you, he paused, his voice thick with emotion. You walking through that door tonight? That took guts. Reaper would have been proud. Ethan stared at the photo, his father's face frozen in time, the man he'd never known, the ghost that had haunted his entire life. I don't know anything about this world, Ethan admitted. I'm not a biker. I work construction in Phoenix. I don't even own a motorcycle. A younger biker with a shaved head, Danny Wrench Martinez, laughed from the pool table. Hell, neither did half of us when we started. You learn. Axe leaned over the bar. What made you come here, kid? Really? Ethan took a breath. Because my whole life I felt like something was missing. Like there was a part of me I didn't understand. My mum told me stories, but they were just pieces. I needed to see where he came from, who he was, who I might have been if things were different. Hammer nodded slowly. And now that you're here? Ethan looked around the room, at the faces watching him, the cuts worn with pride, the brotherhood that existed in the cracks of the floorboards and the smoke-stained walls. Now, Ethan said, I just want to understand. Hammer placed a hand on his shoulder. Then stay, for tonight. Hear the stories. Learn about your father. And tomorrow. He smiled slightly. We'll see if you've got what it takes to ride with ghosts. The hours passed like minutes. The club members took turns sharing stories about Reaper, some funny, some reckless, some heartbreaking. Ethan learned that his father had once ridden through a wildfire to deliver medical supplies to a stranded family, that he'd taught half the younger members how to rebuild their first engines, that he'd been the first one to throw a punch when a brother was disrespected, and the first one to offer forgiveness when mistakes were made. By 2 a.m., most of the bikers had filtered out, heading home or to the club's nearby compound. Only Hammer, Axe, Blaze, and Wrench remained with Ethan. Hammer pulled out a worn leather jacket from behind the bar, faded, patched, and smelling of decades of road dust. This was Reaper's spare cut, Hammer said, holding it up. We kept it after he died. Couldn't bring ourselves to throw it away. He handed it to Ethan. I can't, Ethan started. You can, Hammer interrupted. You're not a member. Not yet. Maybe never. But you're his son, and that means something here. Ethan took the jacket, his hands trembling. It was heavy, not from the material but from the weight of everything it represented. Thank you, he managed. Blaze stood and stretched. You got a place to stay tonight? Ethan shook his head. Was gonna find a motel. Forget that, Wrench said, tossing him a set of keys. Crash at the clubhouse, there's a spare room. It ain't much, but it's got a bed. Ethan caught the keys, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Hammer clapped him on the back. Don't say anything. Just show up tomorrow morning. We ride at 10. Ride? Yeah, Hammer said with a grin. You said you don't know this world. Time to learn. Ethan walked out into the cool desert night, Reaper's jacket draped over his arm. The stars above were infinite, scattered across the black canvas of the sky like diamonds. For the first time in 6 months, maybe for the first time in his life, he didn't feel alone. He looked back at the Iron Den, where the neon sign flickered in the darkness. His father's world, and maybe, just maybe, his own. The sun rose over the Mojave Desert like a furnace being lit, turning the sky from deep indigo to blazing gold. Ethan woke to the sound of motorcycle engines rumbling to life outside the clubhouse, a low, guttural roar that vibrated through the walls. He sat up in the narrow bed, disoriented for a moment. The room was sparse, a mattress, a nightstand, and a single framed photo on the wall, another image of Reaper, this one showing him mid-laugh at some long-ago rally. Ethan rubbed his face and reached for his phone. 9:47 a.m. Hammer had said they rode at 10. He scrambled out of bed, threw on his jeans and boots, and grabbed Reaper's jacket. When he stepped outside, the scene that greeted him stole his breath. The clubhouse compound was a sprawling lot surrounded by chain-link fence, with a garage, a main building, and rows of motorcycles lined up like soldiers. At least 15 Hells Angels were already there, gearing up. The morning air smelled of gasoline, coffee, and desert sage. Hammer stood beside a massive black Harley-Davidson Road King, checking the saddlebags. When he saw Ethan, he grinned. Thought you might sleep through, Hammer called out. Not a chance, Ethan replied, walking over. Blaze emerged from the garage, wiping grease off her hands. Morning, kid. Sleep okay? Better than I expected. Wrench rolled up on a custom chopper, its chrome gleaming in the sunlight. You ready for this? Ready for what? Ethan asked, suddenly nervous. Hammer swung a leg over his bike. We're riding out to Calico Ghost Town, about 15 miles north. It's where we scattered Reaper's ashes 9 years ago. Figured you might want to see it. Ethan's chest tightened. Yeah, I'd like that. Good, Hammer said. Then he pointed to a bike parked near the garage, a mid-2000s Harley Sportster, dusty but well-maintained. That was Reaper's bike. We've kept it running. You're going to ride it. Ethan froze. I don't know how to ride a motorcycle. The group erupted in laughter, not mocking but amused. Axe walked over, slapping Ethan on the back. Then today's the day you learn, brother. For the next 45 minutes, Wrench and Blaze gave Ethan a crash course in motorcycle riding. They showed him the clutch, the throttle, the brakes. They explained balance, weight distribution, and how to lean into turns. Don't overthink it, Blaze said. The bike wants to stay upright, you just gotta let it. Ethan climbed onto Reaper's Sportster, his heart pounding. The seat felt foreign beneath him, the handlebars awkward in his grip. He turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep primal sound that resonated in his bones. Easy on the throttle, Wrench coached. Clutch in, first gear, slowly let it out. Ethan followed the instructions. The bike lurched forward, wobbled, then steadied. He rolled slowly across the compound, his knuckles white on the grips. That's it, Blaze shouted. Who you got it? After several wobbly laps around the lot, Ethan started to feel the rhythm, the relationship between clutch, throttle, and balance. It wasn't graceful, but it was progress. Hammer rode up beside him. You good? Ethan nodded, adrenaline flooding his system. Yeah, I think so. Then let's ride. The convoy rolled out onto Highway 15, heading north toward Calico. Ethan rode in the middle of the pack, flanked by Wrench and Blaze, with Hammer leading at the front. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Rust-colored mesas, Joshua trees standing like sentinels, and the open road disappearing into the horizon. The wind whipped past Ethan's face, carrying the scent of hot asphalt and freedom. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood why his father had chosen this. The road wasn't just a path, it was a way of life. About halfway to Calico, Hammer raised his hand, signaling the group to pull over at a roadside rest stop. The bikers parked in a line, engines cutting off one by one. Ethan dismounted, his legs shaky from the vibration of the bike. Wrench handed him a bottle of water. How you feeling? Wrench asked. Like I just ran a marathon, Ethan admitted. You're doing good, man, real good. Hammer gathered the group in a circle. All right, listen up. Calico's just a few miles ahead, but before we get there, I need to say something. He looked directly at Ethan. This ride isn't just about showing you where Reaper rests. It's about testing you, seeing if you've got the heart to be part of this. Because brotherhood isn't just about blood, it's about loyalty, respect, sacrifice. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of the words. We're not asking you to join the club, Hammer continued. That's a long road and it ain't for everyone. But we are asking if you're willing to honor your father's memory the right way, by living with the same courage he did. I am, Ethan said without hesitation. Hammer smiled. Then let's finish this ride. They arrived at Calico Ghost Town just before noon. The old mining settlement sat nestled in the hills, its weathered buildings and dusty streets frozen in time. Tourists wandered through the area, but the bikers rode past the main attractions, heading up a narrow dirt road into the hills. At the top, they stopped at a clearing overlooking the desert. The view was breathtaking, endless miles of sand, rock, and sky. Hammer dismounted and walked to the edge of the cliff. The others followed, forming a semicircle. This is where we said goodbye to Reaper, Hammer said quietly. He loved this spot. Used to come here when he needed to think. Ethan stepped forward, his throat tight. The wind tugged at his clothes, carrying dust and memories. Blaze pulled a small flask from her jacket and handed it to Ethan. Whiskey, Reaper's favorite. Ethan unscrewed the cap and poured a small stream onto the desert floor. I wish I'd known you, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I wish I could have told you that Mom never stopped loving you, that I turned out okay. He paused, tears streaming down his face. That I forgive you. The words hung in the air, carried away by the wind. Hammer placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. He knows, kid. Wherever he is, he knows. The group stood in silence, honoring the fallen brother and the son who'd finally come home. The ride back to Barstow was slower, more reflective. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the highway. Ethan rode with more confidence now, his body adapting to the rhythm of the bike, but his mind was elsewhere, processing everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. He'd come to Barstow looking for answers about his father. What he'd found was something far more profound, a family he never knew existed. When they pulled back into the clubhouse compound, the atmosphere had shifted. There was a sense of completion, of something sacred having been honored. Hammer killed his engine and climbed off his bike. The others followed suit, gathering in the center of the lot. "Ethan," Hammer called out, "come here." Ethan approached, his heart pounding. Hammer reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded leather vest, a cut, brand new with the Hells Angels insignia stitched onto the back. Ethan's breath caught. "Now, hold on," Hammer said, raising a hand. "This isn't a full patch. You're not a member. Not yet. That takes years, prospects, votes, proving yourself over and over." He held up the vest. "But this," Hammer continued, "is a support vest. It means you're family. It means you're under our protection. And it means that when you're ready, if you're ready, the door's open." Ethan stared at the vest, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Blaze said, stepping forward. "Just put it on." With trembling hands, Ethan took the vest and slipped it over his shoulders. The leather was heavy, solid, real. On the back, beneath the insignia, was a small patch that read, "Reaper's Son." The group erupted in applause and cheers. Wrench clapped him on the back. "Welcome to the family, brother." Axe handed him a beer. "You earned it." Ethan looked around at the faces surrounding him, these strangers who'd become his family in less than 2 days. His eyes glistened with tears, but he was smiling. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you," Hammer raised his beer, "to Reaper, and to his son who had the balls to walk into a bar full of Hell's Angels and ask for the truth." "To Reaper," the group shouted in unison, "and to Ethan." They drank, laughed, and shared stories late into the night. Later, as the stars emerged and the desert cooled, Ethan sat alone on the steps of the clubhouse, staring up at the sky. The vest rested on his shoulders like armor. Hammer walked over and sat down beside him. "You okay?" Hammer asked. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, just thinking. About? My mom, my dad, how different my life could have been." He paused. "But also how grateful I am for how it turned out." Hammer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your old man made mistakes, big ones. But he was a good man. And you," he looked at Ethan, "you're proof that good things can come from hard choices." Ethan wiped his eyes. "I don't know if I'll ever be a full member. I've got a job, a life in Phoenix. But I want to stay connected. To this, to him." "You will," Hammer said. "The road doesn't end, Ethan. It just keeps going. And now you know where to find us." They sat in comfortable silence, two men bound by the memory of someone they both loved. 3 days later, Ethan stood in the parking lot of the Iron Den, his truck loaded with his belongings. He was heading back to Phoenix, but it didn't feel like goodbye. Blaze handed him a road map with several locations circled in red. Hell's Angels chapters across the Southwest. You're ever in trouble, you're ever lost, you find one of these. You tell them who you are. They'll take care of you. Wrench gave him a toolkit for when your bike breaks down, and it will. Axe handed him a phone number scrawled on a napkin. "That's Hammer's direct line. You need anything, and I mean anything, you call." Hammer was the last to say goodbye. He pulled Ethan into a tight hug, the kind of embrace that felt like protection and promise all at once. "You did good, kid," Hammer said. "Your father would be proud." Ethan's voice cracked. "Thank you, for everything." Hammer stepped back, his eyes glistening. "Ride safe and come back soon." Ethan climbed into his truck, the support vest still on his shoulders. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he looked in the rearview mirror, at the bikers standing together, arms raised in farewell. He'd walked into that bar alone, a stranger, with nothing but questions. He was leaving with a vest, a family, and a piece of his father's soul. 6 months later, Ethan returned to Barstow, but this time he didn't arrive in a truck. He rolled up to the Iron Den on a 2016 Harley-Davidson Sportster, the same bike his father had ridden. He'd spent the last half-year learning to ride, working extra hours to afford the bike, and preparing himself for what came next. When he walked through the door, Hammer looked up from the bar and grinned. "Well, I'll be damned," Hammer said. "You came back." "I told you I would," Ethan replied. Hammer walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You ready to start your prospect period?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I'm ready." Hammer nodded. "Then welcome home, brother." The jukebox kicked on, AC/DC, just like that first night. and for the first time in his life, Ethan Calloway felt like he was exactly where he belonged.